Hello. Welcome to Rainy Day Podfics. I am your host, J Pan Bean, or you can come up with something new for me and put it down in the comments. Today I will be reading Prelude Maxixe, Chapter 2, called Rooftops and Ice Quirks. Summary. The second time Izuku met Shoto. Hey! Leave him alone! Izuku cried, clutching the straps of his backpack in his hands. Kacchan was standing over a timid, brown-haired boy who had a quirk that wasn't suited for fighting. Explosion marks lined the sidewalk and his uniform. Kacchan only turned around with a condescending smirk. Yeah? And the fuck are you gonna do about it, useless Deku? The other three standing behind him just laughed as Izuku tried to think of something to say. He knew there was no way he could beat Kacchan in a fight. That much was obvious. And it's not like the teachers would listen either. What, got nothing to say, fucking Deku? Kacchan mocked as he came up beside him, his hand hitting Izuku's chest, setting off a series of explosions that sent him flying back. He cried out at the pain of hitting the tile floor, but despite the aching pain Izuku felt from the blow, he pushed his hands onto the ground, trying to stand up. You're so useless. Why does the school even let you stay? It's not like you contribute anything to society anyway. Kacchan laughed, an even larger explosion being set off in his face. One of Kacchan's friends slapped him on his head, using their enlarging quirk to add even more pain to the hit as Izuku winced. Trying to ignore the pain, Kacchan only set off another explosion on his arm, creating small burns and dust on his black uniform. The other boy had stood up and quickly ran off as well, not even giving Izuku a chance to ask if he was all right. Sighing, he picked up his backpack, shoveling the spilled contents back inside the pockets before standing up and dragging his feet towards the door. Every day was always the same. Wake up, go to school, get hit, come back home, rinse and repeat, and without fail, it happened every day. Though there were those good moments when he went to Illumination and Hako gave him one of her new desserts, it brightened him up, always making him feel better. Of course, Hako didn't know he was quirkless either. She probably knew he was bullied. It wasn't like he talked about it, she just seemed observant enough to know. And of course, there was also the day he'd met Shoto, who hadn't judged him at all for being quirkless. Izuku didn't even quite know why he had told the two-colored boy he was quirkless. It just sort of happened. Maybe he was trying to protect himself from getting his hopes up that someone would be nice to him, but that clearly hadn't worked, seeing as Shoto just hadn't cared about the lack of a quirk in Izuku. Something out of school, he inhaled a deep breath of smoke, making him cough as he tried to cover his mouth. Trying to find the source of the smoke, he spotted a line of burning buildings. A group of firefighters were attempting to put the fire out, though not making much progress. The fire must have been the result of someone's quirk. Covering his mouth with his uniform sleeve, quickly walked down the road home, hoping to get there fast. Weaving around the people in the streets, Izuku nearly bulldozed into the apartment, shutting the door behind him. Taking in a deep breath, he frowned at the smell. He could still smell the smoke from earlier lingering in his lungs, but he shook his head, opting to deal with his burns and focus on his homework, maybe even study up some sidekicks if he got the time. A couple hours had already passed, though his nose and mouth still felt stuffy from the smoke he'd accidentally inhaled when leaving school. Sighing, he turned off his computer and closed his hero analysis notebook. Making sure to tie his shoes properly, he climbed up the stairs to the rooftop of his apartment. It took him some effort with the number of stairs there were, but eventually he made it to the top, albeit panting a bit. Taking in a deep breath, he smiled with relief, thankful that the air was relatively fresh. He stared up at the already deep blue sky. The sun had set a few hours ago. Izuku walked over to the railing, closing his eyes as he tried to capture the peacefulness of the slightly noisy. Looking at the hundreds of tall buildings, he nearly jumped over the edge of the metal bars when a cold hand tapped his shoulder. Trying to regain his balance, Izuku's head swung over his shoulder to come face to face with Shoto. Hello, Izuku, the boy said as the green-haired boy just stared at him in return. He remembered Shoto, of course, someone who had accepted his quirklessness, though this time he looked a bit different. Shoto's red and white hair, although still slightly mixed together, no longer covered his left eye. His left eye, which Izuku only now realized was a stunning shade of turquoise. Shaking himself away from the color of Shoto's iris, he noticed the giant red scar covering near half of the left side of his face. It looked like it must have been painful. Shoto flinched, one hand moving up to cover his scar when Izuku realized he was mumbling his thoughts again. Profusely apologizing, he decided to conjure up the courage to ask Shoto a question that only now occurred to him. Why are you here? I didn't know you live here, but you're still on the roof of my apartment, so you must live somewhere around here? Izuku cursed himself for stuttering, but he knew it was a habit that would be hard to break, even if it was around someone who didn't bully him. Shoto blinked, staring at him. He wasn't wearing a school uniform, so Izuku assumed that he'd already changed out of it. Seeing as the completely heterochromatic boy looked around his age, he most likely went to school. I like walking around rooftops to run away, Shoto finally said, leaning over the railing to stare off into the skyline. Run away from what? Izuku inquired, only to quickly backpedal when he realized what he just asked. Sorry, that's really insensitive of me. You don't have to tell me. I was just curious. He waved his arms around as he apologized, but Shoto's face didn't change. In fact, he hadn't even turned to look at Izuku like he just asked a question that was too private to share. The boy only leaned forward, farther over the rooftop than Izuku thought was safe. Running from my old man, Shoto answered like it was the most well-known fact in the world, though his shoulders stiffened a bit. Of course, he had suspected that Shoto had family problems when they first met. It was a conclusion he came to after thinking over the several injuries the boy had, but it seemed like too private of a topic to keep prying. Izuku just nodded. Even though he knew Shoto couldn't see him, he couldn't find anything to say, but the silence felt too awkward, so he opted to talk about the one thing he knew best. Shoto, do you think quirks are cool? The question was stupid. Obviously he would think quirks were cool, seeing as he had amazing control over a strong quirk. Ice quirks weren't common, nor were they rare, but being able to freeze an entire building and ever so carefully spread a veneer layer of frost over a body part had to take a lot of practice, and if Izuku was speaking for himself, he'd give up half of his lifespan for a quirk. After all, he wanted to be a hero, but that wouldn't be possible without a quirk. Sometimes I wish I didn't have a quirk. That answer right there shocked Izuku so much. He found it incredible that he hadn't slipped off the building yet. Grasping for the right words, he whipped his head around to face Shoto. Why? It wasn't something Izuku could believe so easily. Shoto had a quirk strong enough to freeze whole buildings, wanted to be quirkless at times. The ice user just shrugged, the same dull look on his face as he answered, Maybe my family wouldn't be a mess. That shut Izuku up fast. Clearly, Shoto was very blunt. Most people wouldn't have answered with such honesty that they had familial problems, so he decided to stop pressing. The other boy would probably just answer as he had with the past few questions, but Izuku saw the way his shoulders slightly tensed when he was talking about his father. Well, Izuku tried to think of something to steer the conversation away from family drama, but after coming up with nothing, just decided to stay quiet. A few minutes, or maybe more, into the silence, Izuku decided the quiet rustling of air in cars far below them was too quiet of a sound despite the ambience that came from with it. Reaching into the pocket of the red vest he changed into earlier, he pulled out his phone, searching for a good playlist to maybe listen to. Do you want to listen to music? Thankfully, the tall boy didn't ignore him, tilting his head slightly to the left, his red hair falling on top of his eyes as he nodded. Playing the simple melody of a song, he and Shoto must have stood there for hours, just listening to a piano paired with the soft voice of a girl. The sky grew increasingly darker, going from a muted blue to a midnight blue, the moon not quite visible as it hid behind the gray clouds. Izuku thought he might as well have fallen asleep. Maybe he was lucid dreaming. He leaned against the metal railing, his eyes fluttering closed every few seconds. I have to go, Shoto said suddenly, turning around to walk towards the edge of the building. In his slightly sleepy haze, Izuku hadn't realized that the other boy was walking, possibly about to jump a several-meter gap between the next apartment. Bye, he said brightly, trying to shake the good feelings out of him, knowing that he wouldn't be able to keep it for too long. Shoto paused slightly before returning with a quiet bye that Izuku almost missed. The freckled boy sighed as he pocketed his phone, making sure to turn off the music. Wandering back down the stairs, he quickly entered the house, relieved and yet slightly disappointed that his mom wasn't home yet. He sat down in front of his computer, typing something into the search bar that was currently looking very intriguing to Izuku. ice quirks, he muttered, looking through the articles. The first one he clicked on, from a well-known site called Quirky Chronicles, gave a pretty in-depth description of ice quirks. However, it only talked about the most common type, which was freezing the liquid from large bodies of water. But his new friend, could he even call Shoto that? Seemed to draw water out from the atmosphere and freeze it. According to some statistics he found from other databases, that was a much more uncommon type of ice quirk, especially if it were to be so strong. He grabbed a notebook from the bookshelf, labeling it General Quirk Analysis, Book 1. He listed as much information as he could, drawing diagrams where he could fit them to. One of the links he clicked on led him to a video from a while ago of a vigilante. Apparently not a lot of people with ice quirks do hero work because ice quirks weren't powerful enough for it. Looking through the search engine, Izuku made sure to add the side effects of said quirks. Supposedly, the most common type of backlash was hypothermia, which made sense considering the amount of cold the user would have to be put through. Most people with ice quirks must have a body made to suit the low temperatures, but even those wouldn't be able to keep them safe from the extreme cold. After all, quirks were physical abilities. There were always limits. Continuing to bullet notes, he must have sat there for at least an hour before nearly jumping out of his skin at the sound of his mom entering the house. Quickly closing the notebook, he poked his head out the doorway, waving to his mom. "Hi," he said, his cheerful voice greeting his tired mother. "Sorry, sweetie. There were a lot of patients today," she said as she took off her shoes, hanging her coat on the hanger. Izuku just nodded, knowing that his mom would have to have been busy, considering working at hospitals did require a lot of time. "I'll be in my room," he called out, before following up with, "I'm doing some quirk analysis." His mom said something else, but he nodded in agreement of before he quickly dropped back onto his chair, continuing to take notes where he left off. Izuku could feel himself getting closer and closer to falling asleep in class, but forced himself to stay awake for the fear of Kacchan seeing him and making fun of him. He knew he stayed up too late last night looking up ice quirks, but he couldn't help it. After meeting Shoto again, he just felt like he needed to know more about his type of quirk. He couldn't quite explain it, but maybe he was looking for the reason that Shoto didn't like his quirk. He had written down a few notes from the first time he saw Shoto, but they weren't quite as detailed as his other hero analysis notes. But after scrounging through the internet, he found a boatload of information about the specific quirk type. Maybe if he saw Shoto again, he could ask him about his quirk. He left the school as fast as he could, thankfully evading Kacchan's friends. He quickly walked down the street, heading to the library. It had a pretty big database on quirks, so hopefully it could help him take more notes. Walking in, he made a beeline for the nonfiction section, looking for anything written on elemental quirks. He knew that an ice-based one had to be an emitter quirk. It definitely couldn't be transformation or mutation, so that left the emitter type. Apparently, there was a vigilante from a few decades ago that had a pretty strong ice quirk. They helped out near the countryside, but were apparently caught by the police at some point. Izuku checked out the articles, searching up the vigilante as soon as he got home. He found a few videos taken by civilians of the vigilante Ice Spike. Based on the clips taken, the vigilante would create weapons out of ice, such as swords or shields. The way he used his quirks seemed pretty versatile to Izuku, so he made sure to list as many details as he could find in his notebook. He'd filled out nearly a quarter of the notebook already, a mixture of diagrams, bullets, and paragraphs. Knowing he had to get started on his homework, Izuku reluctantly placed the journal away, pulling out his workbooks in its place. He couldn't quite concentrate on what the homework was, but he tried anyway, knowing the teacher would berate him for getting even a single question wrong. Alright, that was it for Chapter 2 of Prelude Maxixe by Orphan Account. In the chapter itself, at the end, the last author's note does have a YouTube link to the song they were listening to while they were on the roof. The author said it's from the Chinese drama called Skate into Love. Sounds interesting. So if you want to, check that out, I do recommend actually, going to the fic. Words. Okay, I say a lot. I need to stop that. I did it again. Chapter 3 is called Phone Screens and Freezing Lakes, and the summary is just the third time Izuku met Shoto. I do definitely plan to read. Okay, so I know this is part of the Beryl series. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Beryl. Dog, don't you dare, Dixie. Go. Don't try and attack the cat, you dumbass dog. Sorry. I'm alone with my sister's dog. Aggressive little shit stain. It's fine, it's whatever. I mean, she's learned to kennel herself at this point if she starts getting the urge to go feral on one of the other animals in the house. I don't like the dog, but we have to keep her. Right, okay, so, Beryl, the series, Beryl, someone please correct me if I'm saying it wrong. There are only, 2 parts of the series, Prelude Maxixe and Interlude Morganite, as I've said before. I do definitely plan to read Morganite after I finish with Maxixe. Morganite is a 1-chapter fic, 1,141 words. It's really short. In the actual description of this series, it says continue by for adoption. Okay, that's new. Sorry. What was I saying? What was I saying? Right, okay, well, somewhere in here, it mentions how Morganite was actually, the first part written for the series, and how, the author decided to make Maxixe after, to kind of give a little background on how Todoroki and Midoriya met, and honestly, it's a really cute idea. And so far, I know I'm definitely liking this fic. Just noticed one of the tags is Todoroki doesn't go to UA, and Midoriya doesn't go to UA. Oh, Bakudo doesn't get his character development. Why am I just reading through the tags? Okay, yeah, no, that was literally it. No, normally I just words. Sorry, I make sounds when I can't speak. Normally I kind of just scan through the tags for major warnings or specific things that I should keep an eye out for or that I want to see more of. Vigilante Midoriya. I love Vigilante Midoriya fics. I did also just notice that suicide attempt is one of the tags. Oh, lovely. But no archive warnings apply. Honestly, people, I think, just... Okay, no archive warnings apply is different from creator chose not to use archive warnings. No archive warnings apply kind of gives off, oh, hey, it won't have anything bad in it. It's just going to be kind of neutral, maybe fluffy fic. But saying, creator chose not to use archive warnings... Motherfucker, that's a warning! Sorry, that was probably loud. Todoroki NG is bad at parenting, an asshole, we know that shit. We already know. Yeah, I think I've taken up enough of your time. I've taken up enough of your time. I'm just blabbering at this point. I do hope you enjoyed the fic. Remember to check out the fic on AO3. It's abandoned, but it's cool. You can read the author notes. There isn't really much going on in them, but there is some stuff. Okay. Eat as much as your body can handle. You need to sustain yourself, please. Make sure you drink water at some point. Even just a little bit, but get your water in, bestie. Take any medication if that's something you gotta do. Eat medication, water. What else is there? Right, sleep. People need to sleep. That's fun. Pretty much just take care of yourself, please. Please, for the love of any and all things holy. Please take care of yourself. Bro, stop neglecting your laundry. Do your laundry. Make sure you get that shit done. And shower, brush your teeth. All that shit. Lovely, lovely. Overall, I hope you have a lovely next 24 hours. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this podfic. And I'll hopefully see you for chapter 3. Kudos. Or what the fuck? Kudos? That is not what I meant to say. What was I gonna say? I don't know. Make sure you leave kudos on the actual fic itself. Yeah, do that. Sorry, that was loud. Yeah, goodbye. Bye-bye.